The quarterly review meeting starts at 9, and by 8:57, every chair around the conference table on the third floor of Calloway Marsh Financial Services has been taken, every chair except the one at the far left corner, the one closest to the door that leads to the copy room, the one that has been, for reasons nobody has ever formally articulated but everyone understands with the specific wordless fluency of institutional social hierarchies, designated as Eleanor Vance's chair. Eleanor Vance is 38 years old. She has worked at Calloway Marsh for 11 years. She has a master's degree in financial analysis from the University of Michigan and a CFA charter she earned while working full-time and raising a daughter alone after a divorce that was, in the way of most divorces, both entirely predictable in retrospect and entirely devastating in the living of it. She is, by any objective measure of the skills that a financial services firm should value, one of the most technically capable people in this building. She enters the conference room at 8:58 and takes her chair by the door and opens her laptop and does not make eye contact with anyone, because she has learned, the way you learn things that cost you something each time the lesson is delivered, that making eye contact in this room invites the specific discomfort of people who are not sure whether to acknowledge you and choose, consistently, not to. The meeting begins. The department head, a man named Richard Calloway Jr., son of one of the firm's founders, 44 years old, with the easy authority of someone who has always been the most important person in every room he has entered and has therefore never needed to develop the habit of checking whether that impression is accurate, opens with a summary of the firm's current position. The firm is doing well, Richard says. Revenue is up. Client retention is strong. The investment portfolio is performing above benchmark. Eleanor opens a spreadsheet she has been building, quietly, for the past 4 months. She looks at the numbers on the screen. She looks at Richard. She closes the spreadsheet. She has tried, 3 times in the past 4 months, to raise what she has found. Each time she was dismissed, told she showed a misunderstanding of revenue recognition, told her concerns were outside strategic priorities, told that senior leadership found no material concerns. She sits in her corner chair. She listens to Richard describe a firm that exists, in his telling, in a state of uncomplicated prosperity. The firm she can see in her spreadsheet is 18 months from insolvency. It had not started as isolation. She had joined Calloway Marsh 11 years ago as a mid-level financial analyst, recruited specifically for her background in derivative instrument valuation, a narrow but technically demanding specialty that the firm's partners had decided they needed someone to understand. She had been, in those first years, valued, not warmly, not socially, but valued in the specific transactional way of someone whose skill solves a problem that needs solving. Her analyses were quoted in client reports. Her risk assessments were incorporated into investment committee recommendations. Then Richard Calloway Jr. was promoted to department head, 3 years ago, and brought with him a particular philosophy of financial management that Eleanor, reviewing it in the privacy of her own understanding, would characterize as optimistic in a way that is indistinguishable from incautious. Richard believed, with the full sincerity of someone who has never personally experienced the consequences of being wrong about money, that the role of a risk analyst was to support investment decisions rather than to interrogate them. Eleanor's role was, in Richard's organizational vision, to validate conclusions that had already been reached. She had tried, in the first months under Richard's leadership, to raise concerns through the channels that professional practice suggested, meeting requests, memos, flagged items in weekly reports. Each attempt had been received with a version of the same response, polite, dismissive, and followed, with a reliability she eventually began to recognize as deliberate rather than coincidental, by a small reduction in her institutional standing. Fewer meeting invitations. A revised reporting structure that moved her further from the investment committee. A performance review that praised her technical skills while noting concerns about her collaborative approach and team alignment. What she discovered, over 3 years, was that the problem was not her clarity. The problem was that being clear about a thing the institution did not want to be clear about is not a communication failure. It is an institutional failure, and institutional failures do not respond to individual communication improvements because the institution is not, actually, confused. It has made a choice about what it wants to know, and the person with information the institution has decided not to want is not going to change that choice by phrasing the information more compellingly. She had spent 3 years being right about this, and it had not helped at all. Until it did. The spreadsheet Eleanor has been building for 4 months began as a routine exercise in stress testing, running scenarios in which market conditions shift adversely to understand how a portfolio performs under pressure. What she found, running those scenarios against Calloway and Marsh's current portfolio, was not a stress scenario. It was the current situation, disguised as normal operation by a revenue recognition methodology that she had been trying to flag for 2 years. The structured products that accounted for 43% of the firm's managed portfolio had, across the past 26 months, been performing significantly below the returns that the firm was reporting to clients, not by a little, but by a margin that Eleanor's analysis placed, conservatively, at between $34 million and $47 million in cumulative understated losses. Losses that, under the firm's current revenue recognition approach, were being deferred, recognized over periods extending beyond what standard accounting practice would support, in a way that made the quarterly figures look stable while the underlying position deteriorated steadily. This is not the worst thing she finds. The worst thing she finds is the fee structure. The firm's management fees are calculated on the reported value of the portfolio, not the actual value. Which means that for 26 months, Calloway and Marsh has been charging clients management fees on assets that are worth less than the fee calculation assumes. Eleanor is a CFA charter holder. She knows what this is called. She does not call a lawyer first, though she will need one eventually. She calls her daughter. Maya is 17, a junior in high school, the kind of person her father's absence and her mother's particular combination of analytical precision and emotional reserve have produced, someone who thinks clearly under pressure. Mom, is this the kind of thing where you do the right thing and lose everything, or the kind of thing where you do the right thing and it actually works out? I don't know, Eleanor says. Both, maybe. Different timelines. Maya is quiet for a moment. Then, you've been miserable for 3 years. I've been managing. You've been miserable, Maya says, with the specific directness of a 17-year-old who has watched her mother manage for 3 years and has her own opinions about the costs of that management. Do the thing, Mom. Whichever thing. Stop managing it. Eleanor sits with this for a long time after they hang up. Then she calls someone she has not spoken to in 2 years, a woman named Patricia Huang, who was Eleanor's supervisor for 5 years before Patricia left Calloway and Marsh, and who left, Eleanor understands now with greater clarity than she had at the time, for reasons that had a great deal to do with the same institutional tendencies Eleanor has been documenting ever since. Patricia Huang now works as a compliance consultant with direct relationships at the SEC's examination division. She answers on the 3rd ring. Eleanor, she says, and there is something in the specific quality of the way she says the name, not surprise exactly, but something adjacent to inevitability, that tells Eleanor she has called the right person. I need to talk to you about Calloway and Marsh, Eleanor says. I have documentation. A pause. How complete is it? Complete enough that I've spent 4 months checking and rechecking it because I was hoping I was wrong. And are you wrong? No, Eleanor says. I'm not. Another pause, longer this time. I know someone at the SEC's Enforcement Division, Patricia says. Her name is Diane Park. She's been tracking fee disclosure irregularities in the mid-market advisory space for 14 months. I think you have something she's been missing. A pause. Eleanor. Have you told anyone at the firm about the fee structure finding specifically? I've raised concerns 3 times. Each time I was dismissed. None of the specific fee calculation finding, I found that 2 months ago. Good, Patricia says. Don't tell anyone at the firm. Not yet. Another pause. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? Bring everything. Eleanor looks at the spreadsheet on her screen. 4 months of work. 26 months of data. 38 pages of supporting analysis. Yes, she says. I'll be there. They spend 4 hours at Patricia's conference table. Patricia reads everything. She asks questions that Eleanor answers with the specific precision of someone who has spent 4 months preparing for exactly this conversation, who has anticipated each follow-up and built the supporting documentation because she understood, after 3 years of being told her concerns were outside the scope of strategic priorities, that the only way her analysis would survive contact with skepticism was to be the kind of analysis that does not require anyone to take her word for anything. At 1:47 p.m., Patricia picks up the phone and calls Diane Park. Diane Park is 46, a senior enforcement attorney at the SEC with 17 years of experience. She listens to Patricia's summary for 11 minutes without interrupting. Walk me through the fee structure finding, Diane says. Not the revenue recognition piece, I want to hear the fee calculation methodology first. Eleanor walks her through it. 15 minutes. Numbers, dates, specific line items. When she finishes, Diane Park is quiet for 6 seconds. You've been at this firm for 11 years. Yes. And you raised concerns internally. 3 times. The last time was 7 months ago. Do you have documentation of those internal submissions? Yes. All 3, with timestamps and the responses I received. Another silence. Ms. Vance. What you've described is consistent with the pattern my team has been tracking for 14 months, and the documentation you're describing would substantially advance an investigation that has been developing without the internal evidence it needed. The next 6 weeks are the strangest professional experience of Eleanor Vance's life, which is a high bar given the 3 years that preceded them. She goes to work every day. She sits in her chair by the copy room door. She attends meetings where Richard Calloway Jr. describes a firm in uncomplicated prosperity. She is acknowledged by 11 people in the building, she has counted, because this is the kind of thing she counts, and meaningfully engaged with by 2, one of whom is the building's facilities manager and one of whom is a junior analyst named Trevor who asks her questions about derivative valuation with the specific unself-conscious directness of someone who doesn't yet know she's the person nobody talks to. She does not tell Trevor anything about what is happening. She answers his questions about derivative valuation with complete accuracy and answers nothing else he doesn't ask. Maya texts her, at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday 4 weeks into the waiting, "How are you holding up?" She types back, "Fine." It's slow. Maya texts, "You're not fine. But you're doing the thing. That's different." Eleanor looks at this for a long time. Then she puts her phone down and goes to sleep, and she does sleep, which surprises her, and she wakes up the next morning and goes back to work. The SEC's formal examination of Calloway and Marsh begins on a Tuesday morning 6 weeks after Eleanor's conversation with Diane Park, when 4 members of the examination team arrive at the firm's offices. Eleanor is at her desk. She has known they were coming since the previous Friday, when Diane Park called to give her a 48-hour advance notice she had not been obligated to provide but provided anyway. What she does not know is that the examination has uncovered something she did not find in her 4 months of analysis. What they find, Eleanor learns the following morning, sitting across from Diane Park. The revenue recognition irregularities and the fee calculation discrepancies are not the result of aggressive accounting decisions made by the firm's financial team. They are the result of instructions, documented, in email chains that the firm's IT systems preserved, from Richard Calloway Jr. directly, issued to the firm's controller over a period beginning 31 months ago, instructions that describe, with a specificity that removes any possibility of misinterpretation, a deliberate methodology for deferring loss recognition and inflating fee basis valuations. This is not aggressive accounting. This is not a gray area. This is securities fraud, and Eleanor Vance's 4 months of financial analysis, combined with the SEC's 6-week document review, have produced a complete evidentiary record of it. "How are you?" Diane Park asks, when she has finished explaining what they found. Eleanor considers the question with the specific attention she gives to questions that deserve careful answers. "I've been at that firm for 11 years, she says. "I've been in that chair by the copy room door for 3 of them. I've submitted 3 memos that nobody read and had 1 performance review that told me I had alignment issues." A pause. "I'm processing the distance between what I suspected and what's actually true. The distance is larger than I thought." "The distance usually is," Diane says. "In my experience, when people who know institutions well say something is wrong, the actual wrongness tends to be larger than the person who found it estimated, because the people doing the wrong thing have always had more time with it than the person who found it." Eleanor sits with this. "What happens now?" she asks. "Now," Diane says, "we do the formal part. And I want to talk to you about your own position, because you've acted as a cooperating source, which carries specific protections under whistleblower statutes that I want to make sure you understand before anything else moves forward." The enforcement action is announced on a Thursday morning, 6 weeks after the examination began, in the form of a regulatory notice delivered to Calloway and Marsh's registered legal address and simultaneously published on the SEC's public disclosure system. Eleanor is not in the building when the notice arrives. She is, on Diane Park's strongly worded recommendation, in an attorney's office 3 miles away, having been placed on paid administrative leave the previous afternoon. At 2:34 p.m., her phone rings. It is Patricia Huang. "The enforcement notice is public," Patricia says. "I wanted you to hear it from me before you saw it somewhere else." "I know," Eleanor says. "I've been watching the SEC's disclosure feed." A silence. Then Patricia says, and her voice carries something Eleanor has not heard from many professional sources across her career, "You did it, Eleanor. You held the whole thing together for 4 months, alone, and you did it." Eleanor looks at the attorney's conference table, which has a water stain on the far left corner and a scratch near the center that she has been looking at for 2 hours. "I had the spreadsheet," she says. "You had the spreadsheet and the judgment to know what it meant and the discipline to build a case that nobody could dismiss," Patricia says. "Don't minimize it. It's not minimizable." The firm, Calloway and Marsh Financial Services, 63 years old, founded by 2 men whose names are still on the letterhead, does not close. The enforcement action triggers a regulatory supervised restructuring in which the firm's remaining partners cede operational control to an independent administrator appointed by the SEC, who immediately retains Patricia Huang's consulting firm to conduct a full portfolio and financial statement review. Patricia calls Eleanor. "I need someone to lead the financial review team," she says. "Someone who understands the portfolio, knows where the bodies are buried, and has already done 4 months of the work. I'm on administrative leave, Eleanor says. Your leave ends the day the administrator formally takes control, Patricia says. Which is next Monday. You'd be reporting to me, and through me to the independent administrator. Not to anyone currently employed by Calloway and Marsh. Not to Richard Calloway Jr., who will never be employed by Calloway and Marsh or anyone else in this industry again. The clients, Eleanor says. The 412 accounts. What's the actual damage? It's recoverable, Patricia says. Painful, but recoverable. The fee overcharges over 26 months total approximately $31 million in aggregate. The underlying assets weren't as damaged as the reported trajectory suggests. Which means the firm was in better shape than the fraudulent reporting made it look, Eleanor says, because the fraud needed the stable assets to hide behind. A silence. Eleanor. You interrupted it at exactly the right point. Monday, she says. I'll be there Monday. The restructuring, when Eleanor joins it, is exactly as complicated and slow and unglamorous as she expected, not the dramatic vindication of a film's third act but the specific, procedural difficulty of unwinding 26 months of deferred recognition, reconciling 412 client accounts against their actual performance, identifying the gap between what was reported and what was real, and building the foundation of a firm that is smaller and more honest than the one that existed before. She does this work with the specific combination of patience and precision that 3 years of being the person nobody listened to has, in an irony she allows herself to notice without dwelling on, made her very good at doing alone. She is not alone now. She has a team of 6, 2 of whom are from Patricia's consulting firm and 4 of whom are new hires brought in specifically for the restructuring who have no prior relationship with Calloway and Marsh and no prior opinions about whose analysis is worth taking seriously. They take her analysis seriously. This is, she finds, both more straightforward than she expected and more disorienting, because she has spent 3 years calibrating her expectations around not being taken seriously, and recalibrating takes time. 14 months after Eleanor Vance walks into Patricia Huang's consulting office with a USB drive, Calloway and Marsh Financial Services completes a regulatory supervised restructuring that returns $28.4 million to client accounts, approximately 92 cents on the dollar of the estimated $31 million in cumulative fee overcharges. Eleanor Vance leads that function as Chief Risk Officer. She no longer sits in the chair by the copy room door. She has an office with a window, which she has furnished with a single personal item, a framed copy of the original 4-page memo she submitted to the Compliance Department 7 months before the enforcement action, the one that was received with a note describing no material concerns. She keeps it not as a trophy. She is genuinely not the kind of person who keeps trophies, which is part of why she was in that chair for 3 years, but as a specific, daily reminder that institutional dismissal and institutional failure are 2 different things, and that the institution, not the dismissed person, is the one that pays the eventual cost of the confusion. Maya, now 18, visits the new office and looks at the framed memo for a long time. Is that the one nobody read? Yes. And now you're the Chief Risk Officer. Yes. Maya looks at the framed memo again. Then, did it work out, or did you lose everything? Eleanor thinks about this. Both, she says. Different timelines. Like I told you. Maya nods. Good, she says. That's honest. The lesson is not that persistence wins. The lesson is not that being right eventually pays off. The lesson is simpler and less comfortable than either of those, that institutions fail, reliably, when they decide that the people best positioned to see the failure are the ones least worth listening to. And that when those people stop waiting for permission to be heard, the institution finally learns, at whatever cost the delay has accumulated, what it should have heard years earlier. Eleanor Vance knew what was happening to Calloway and Marsh for 3 years before anyone acted on it. She tried, 3 times, through proper channels, to make the institution hear her. The institution did not hear her. What the institution heard, eventually, was the SEC, and what the SEC had to say was built, entirely, from 4 months of work done by the person the institution had put in the chair by the copy room door. Some information travels slowly. It always arrives.